Hello, hello.
Hey,
We are here. This is Biweeklycast. This is episode number 54. I didn't mess up. I'm Dima Malenka.
I'm Slava Rudinsky, and today we are going to talk about thought leadership.
Yeah, we'll see about that because I think I initially thought we were going to talk about thought leadership, but we'll see about that, right?
For that, we do have a follow-up, don't we?
Yes, we do. I do have a follow-up, and last time we discussed the undead documents and kind of challenges surrounding keeping the documentation up to date and useful. And I realized that I kind of contribute to this mess with documentation in multiple ways. One is that I generally prefer creating a new document over a document which I think like substantially diverging from what it is, from what it needs to be. And I guess it doesn't help this entire kind of situation because now we have two documents and of which one is decidedly out of date and one is going to become out of date soon enough. Yeah. But this is how I roll. I also had a little bit of a trying to construct a justification for that, and apologies for the dog barking out there. The justification for that was that I remember reading somewhere that Franz Kafka, like famous writer, that his style of writing was that he never edited, just rewrote the whole thing. And I said, oh, I can justify that I'm I'm doing this following his footsteps. But then I decided, like, before I put this in the notes for our show, I decided, like, yeah, I probably need to fact check that kind of thing. And turns out it's some sort of a urban legend or something like that. There is indication for both. He did both editing, but also on several occasions he did rewrite the whole thing. But also people say that he was referring to his previous draft when kind of working on the next draft, which is more like editing, not throwing away and creating a new. So I don't think I have a justification for keep creating new documents. It's just the way I am. I wonder what you think about this, how you deal with this kind of situation.
Well, I try not to deal, but if I have to, I probably would edit. Do you think Kafka could be considered an engineer in this regard? Like sometimes you fix the bug, sometimes you do refactoring and rebuild the system when it's too outdated.
That is an interesting analogy and metaphor. I don't think I'm qualified enough to talk about Kafka's literary legacy, but this is an interesting thought. Like, I would love to have an opportunity to call myself a Kafka's engineer, something like that.
But it's like saying that there is an engineer who just fixes the bugs or the engineer who just does the refactoring. Like, yeah, you might have some strengths and weaknesses, but you do both.
Yeah, that's right. Generally, you do both. All right, then maybe on to the topic.
Yeah, you found a website.
Yes. Remember, was it I think it was in previous episode again, when I talked about my foray into Hacker News and kind of trying to cast the net over the web to find some interesting materials. This is how this particular thing came to be. I saw this in the Hacker News newsletter. I skimmed through either description or the introduction of it. It felt interesting to me, because kind of this whole idea of thought leadership and influencing other people. And I thought, like, well, why? Yeah, maybe I suggest that we do that. And we were looking for a book. We didn't want something big, something or other. We put this on the agenda.
How long did it take you to read this through this body of text?
I like how you call this body of text. I would have to confess that there are several elements to it. I would have to confess that I would not be able, in all honesty, to say that I read it in full. I bailed at some point, and like some parts I just skimmed through. But yeah, so several days maybe. And the latter part was like me forcing to prep for the podcast, actually.
Welcome to the club. For people who don't know what we are talking about, there is a website which is named Ineffable.
I think it's part of the kind of a blog by a professional called Dean Barker. And this whole, his idea of he's exploring the ineffable concept of thought leadership, he created a separate subsite dedicated to this whole topic.
And when I think about it, it feels as if it's a draft for something, like as if I'm peeking into someone's notes before this person wrote an article or a book or something. It does have a structure, so there are some chapters there. It is built like a wiki, so you can basically jump from page to page, from chapter to chapter, and sometimes even out of this area to some articles or other concepts explained somewhere else. But all in all, it was quite a pleasant experience in terms of user interface. Like, I really liked the way it was structured, and it was easy to stop reading and then come back because I was reading it in 3 iterations, and like it didn't have any issues refreshing where I was and just moving on. That's pretty much everything nice I have to say about this.
I agree with you. This was part of the appeal when I first came across it, because on the surface, if you look at the table of contents or something along those lines, it does have a booky feel to it. Like there are 15 or something chapters, you have names, and I thought like, maybe this is a new and relatively novel way to present a book on the web. Like what a book could have been if it was not constrained by a paper with no links and stuff like that. That was also part of an appeal of this thing for me to kind of to explore how this might.
So, summing up, I really love the structure. I love the way it was designed. I mean, as a website with cross links, with little chunks. And what I also appreciate is that the author tried to start with the definitions. I love definitions. I think he kind of failed defining, but he tried, and that does deserve a round of applause, because I still, like, after reading through these first 3 chapters where he was giving disclaimers, then trying to define, explaining why he needs definition, then defining things, I couldn't really explain even his understanding of what thought leadership is. To me, it feels something like blogging right now, and different parts of influence by bloggers, even though he does use examples not only from social media, but from internal communications and some different channels, not just text, but video and podcast and everything else. But it does still, like, most of the examples are kind of about social networks and the way you voice out most of the examples. And whenever I was going through any of the chapters, it kind of felt as a manual for blogger beginner.
I largely agree with you. I think that kudos to author to kind of doing it in a structural way, right? Going for definition first and then working from that definition and kind of layering his thoughts and opinions on top of that. That's probably validates our format. Well, it's a data point to confirm that the format we generally try to stick with to is helpful, because here this is how it broke down for me as well. I was like, great, this is going to be the definition, and then we are going to discuss. And I'm reading the definition, and similar to you, I definitely think I don't agree with the definition, and also I don't think I fully understand the definition as it is presented in the material. And I agree with you that this is. I was trying to come up with theme, like how if I don't want to call it thought concept of discussion of the concept of thought leadership, which I don't want to call it, like how else would I call it? I would maybe switch thought leadership for personal brand or something along those lines, because it, like you said, it's about building your digital footprint on the internet and the challenges of that and the positive effects that can come out of that if you are in any way successful with that.
And his definition is thought leadership is content, which is probably justifiable, created to demonstrate knowledge or a skill of a person or organization in order to create future business value. And I think that in his article further, he did focus on content a lot, on demonstration of knowledge and skill a lot, not really about organization. There were just few remarks about companies, but it was mostly personal rather than organizational. And I didn't catch much about creating value. Like, it seemed to me that maybe these chapters are not written down yet. Like, given his definition, I kind of struggle to connect what he defines and what he writes. That's why I was really happy that you decided to suggest our own.
Right. Maybe we can go into that. And you're right. Like, first thing it broke my brain is like this whole phrase, thought leadership is content. Wait a minute. Like,
Is it leadership or is it content?
how can, like, is it, to me, like, content as somewhat tangible thing lives on a different plane than the notion of leadership. I don't know how leadership can, like, leadership to me is a kind of a happening, or right, a derived almost characteristic of a process or something along those lines. But I don't think it is possible to equate leadership with any sort of tangible thing. Am I weirdo that way, or it just doesn't sound right to me, like Englishy way?
Yeah, but I mean, later he does try to break it down, like in the next article, about some steps that, in his understanding, that you do some kind of work, then you create some kind of content around this work, you put it somewhere on the right channel, and some people read it. And all these sections are considered leadership. But I think that the next chapter, breaking down thought leadership, is way more about definition than the definition chapter.
Good point. Good point. Should we try to give our own definitions for what thought leadership is?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so what's yours?
I don't know. Like that's the core definition. But if I have to say, I think it's in the popular way of understanding, it's the influence of people, doesn't really matter experts or non-experts, on ideas, meditations, conclusions, and beliefs of their audience. That's how I probably would frame it. And in this regard, their audience could be professional, could be personal, could be lifestyle, could be something. But I really like the word that they use in Ukrainian, influencers, rather than thought leadership, because I think that in this case, it's way more illustrative. And I would use the word leadership for something more thought provocative, like where you just show the way and then people follow and think with you, just by the definition. And the thing that was described in this book seems more like influencing to me.
I think my thoughts on that like largely overlap with you. Like the influence is a big part that was missing for me in this whole thing. It's just this material describes the just creation of content for the sake of creating content. And I think, to me, thought leadership, and I put it in the notes. Sorry, I didn't make a concerted effort to kind of make this definition more concise, but by and large, for me, it reads like thought leadership is an intentional sharing of opinions and or guidance with the goal of influencing others to change, improve their ways of doing something. And ideally, that would be based on someone's experience or practical experimentation. And then that there is kind of crossing of that thing into the influencer sphere, if I may put it that way. And I wrote, in extreme perverse forms, it can grow decoupled from actual practical experience and have a goal of inspiring more demand for thought leadership without any further practical impact. Just kind of self-perpetuating thing. I shared something interesting so that people demand me to share more of something interesting, which I indulge in, and then it kind of takes a life of its own.
Do you think we could give an example of someone who we believe could be labeled as a thought leader?
Yes, I think I can kind of professionally. Those examples maybe sort of sound trivial or banal or maybe too idealistic, but I don't, like, I would say that there are in my field, and maybe I'm going to give up my age a little bit now, but I don't know, like folks like Martin Fowler, who've been in industry for a long time. He was advocating for particular practices and approaches to things. He developed them and evolved them over time, but he was consistent in trying to influence the industry to follow them, or at least to consider them and use that to improve how we do software. engineering, and I think he did it, from what I can see and from what I can judge, in good faith. Yes, like the article describes, that him being a prominent figure, thought leader, brought him and his employers business and stuff like that, but I don't think he crossed into the territory of kind of doing this thing for the sake of generating more influencing business for him. He was kind of genuinely part of the industry trying to move it forward. And that there are a bunch of other folks of a similar caliber and kind of behavioral pattern, if I may use this word.
You know, as I was thinking about this, I also tried finding something professional and I failed. And for some reason, just experts in something were not considered by me as, like, probably I'm not their target audience. There are some junior experts who learn from them and learn to think. And in my case, it was more of philosophers or business thinkers. And they were mostly Ukrainian, since I've been communicating with Ukrainians a lot for the past few years. And I thought about Alexander Filonenko. They are intellectuals or practical philosophers, you would say.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I read their texts or I interact with them at some forums or conferences, what they say is thought-provoking. Like, after their presentations, I'm like, let me think about that. And they suggest a vector of thinking, and I follow this vector. After conversations with them, it's curious to discover something. In terms of business, it would be some people who reflect on bigger matters than an organization, like Sergei Gaidachuk, the president of CEO Club. Like, whenever I read his articles or I talk to him or I listen to his podcasts, I may disagree with him, but whenever he explains a new idea, I feel curious going and exploring this idea. That's why these are examples that come to my mind. I can say it may be a trigger or something that I was noticing when I was thinking about thought leaders. It's like people whose ideas I would like to discover more. Maybe I'm a bit narrow-minded in this case, and I understand that thought leadership in the broader way could mean a blogger who advertises a candle, but for me, it's probably just like when I think about leadership and thoughts, these words kind of match.
That makes a lot of sense to me, because I would agree with you that one of the attributes or characteristics of someone I would call a thought leader would be, you are interested, like after hearing one thought, you see merit in it and value, whatever the value might be, like interest, intrigue, like a new approach or something like that. And you are then genuinely interested in hearing other thoughts or other opinions from those people. But I was also thinking, as you were speaking, I was also thinking how thought leadership is different, let's say, from being an analyst or industry analyst, right? Because there would be people like my beloved Ben Thompson with his stratechery, both podcast and site. I value very much like his analysis that he's sharing there. It's very compelling, interesting, and deep, and builds on years of experience in actually analyzing the high-tech industry. But I would be hesitant to call him necessarily a thought leader, or this whole interaction of being an example of thought leadership. He is great, brilliant analyst, but I don't think he necessarily has a goal of influencing other people. It's more a goal of explaining or finding patterns and presenting them to people who might be interested in that kind of thing. They may or may not use them to inform how they do business, and that's also not necessarily the main goal.
Would you consider CGP Grey and Mike from Cortex thought leaders?
This is a good question. I think this is a good question. I think the answer might differ if we look at different aspects of their professional activities. I could relatively easily see, like, that's pure speculation. I don't necessarily paid too much attention, and I'm not sure if it's happening, but I could easily see like Mike, for example, being a thought leader for kind of podcasting kind of thing in general, sharing his insights and maybe promoting certain ways of how podcasts should be coming about that way. Yes, but then the regular stuff, the Cortex podcast. Maybe no, it's just two dudes talking. That's great content. I hate this word content, but it's huge, like hugely interesting and entertaining show. But I don't think it's a thought leadership exercise. What do you think?
I was thinking why I'm getting a bit more frustrated with this type of content. Well, firstly, it's because of the context that I live in, and there's not too much entertainment around. But I think that the guys started talking about business, which I'm not interested in, and I'm not really into production of notebooks and something like that. But as they were exploring the themes, that was really interesting. Like their first attempts into themes and their considerations, how it works, what doesn't work here, what's a good example, their practices around that. That was really interesting. Like I was eager to learn from them. I wanted to try it myself. Like it seemed like something that would change the way I think. And now their podcast is more about startup-ish kind of running their business. And this is where I have not much to learn from them. Maybe I'm not just reflective enough, but
I agree. Well, that examples makes a ton of sense to me. That I think almost perfectly matches at least my perception of what thought leadership would be. Like you tried something, it sort of worked. You thought that there is value in this thing. You then share it with folks with the express purpose of people having people to try this thing and kind of improve themselves, and then you yourself continue practicing it and improving on the method and keep sharing this with people. You kind of a pioneer pushing forward a particular, maybe smallish but still space of its own. That's thought leadership. And otherwise other things might be just more marketing kind of an activity for Cortex brand, which is, there's nothing bad with that, right? It's just different.
so here we are, 25 minutes into the episode, finishing the definitions. Yay!
Right. But well, I feel like we did a little bit more. Discussed the definitions, we found examples, and we kind of discussed what it is and what it isn't, and so on.
Sure. Would you like to get back to the writing or just continue the track of discovering thought leadership for us?
I think. Well, do you think that there are things to get back to for us? I'd love to. It's just for me, maybe like circling back where we started. Like it was a great thing that the book, this website, this chaptered essay, whatever it might be, had this structure with the definitions first and then building from definitions. The danger of this approach is sort of that if the definition does not resonate with you, you can kind of lose the reader. This is what happened with me. And if we were not scheduled to discuss it for the podcast, I would probably have abandoned it soon thereafter. But were there points that you wanted to specifically touch on?
Let me blitz question you. Okay. These are just brief things. I've noticed that you were triggered by his writing style. Something rubbed you the wrong way. Did I get it right?
I just, it's not necessarily that I was triggered. I don't think, but this is something I noticed. I think initially when I was reading through the first chapters or pages there, I was like, that's an interesting style. It has a little bit of wit and a little bit of humor in there. But then kind of going further, I realized that, boy, there's too much of that. The text itself feels a bit too self-aware for my liking, and this is why, like, this is, I noted, there is something in it for me.
Yeah, in my regard, I think that I like his humbleness, like where he really accepts that, like, I'm not an expert here, like this is something, this piece could have been better, like I didn't really think well, but that's what I have to say right now. And in this case, like, he does get a lot of my respect. And because of this, I felt really okay with the typos and different grammar mistakes that were happening all around.
Yep, the style indeed is lively. If it were a book, someone would probably say, "Oh, like this is a new and unorthodox style of writing a non-fiction book." Typos, I don't know. Like this 2025 at least. There is a chapter about AI. that there are ways to kind of capture that. I know that, well, I'm guilty of this thing myself, because I keep myself in high regard. So like when I write longish pieces, I don't always kind of proofread them. And I'm super embarrassed when I like send them and then I start reading them and I say, oh, like I missed the word here. There's a typo there in my word. Like I need to make it a point to proofread this thing before I hit send. But also there are means to do that. I don't know. Like I think if I were to publish something of that scale on the internet, I'd probably run it through like Microsoft Word or something.
Especially given that there are so many tools that help you do it really fast these days, like just ChatGPT, Grammarly, a basic spell checker.
But here, look, let's try to explore this from the opposite side, because I also sometimes feel that me trying to get to perfection on something like this is also something that can hold me back. And I spend 15 minutes on something that ideally should have been done in 5 minutes. And I
Right.
don't necessarily feel good about this.
I think that we are mixing up a few things here, because
Okay.
when you're drafting your Notion page for yourself with your thoughts, feel free doing whatever you'd like. When you make it a website and you publish it online, you could spend 10 minutes copy pasting this stuff into a spell checker just to go through, and like you basically go online. Moreover, you write about thought leadership.
I'd say that's a fair critique.
Especially there was one chapter that started with the phrase like, I'm proud of my writing. Writing is my core competency, and this is something that made me distinct. Like I do agree it's nice, but like this minor editing thing could have been better.
That's true. That's true. But what do you make of done is better than perfect kind of thing?
As I said, for this specific style, I'm totally fine. He kind of reminds me of Massimo Pigliucci in the Stoicism book, where he said, like, guys, I'm a practitioner. Like, that's what I do. That's quotes of people I respect. That's what they think about it. Let's think about it together. That's very straightforward. It's humble. And I think this style kind of forgives a lot of stuff. But when you think about, let's say, Kahneman, who says, like, this is hard science, you can't disagree.
Mhm.
Like, I've done research and I'm an expert. And like, well, it's not true. That's not relevant. That doesn't replicate. And this was debunked a few times. You kind of lose the credibility to the person. So I think people who start with this humble opinion, they kind of get way more to be forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
Than when you just broadcast yourself as a like total expert and the only authority on the subject.
I agree with you. Like, it's interesting because as you were speaking, I thought that there was an example in, I don't remember exactly what the chapter was, but something about practicing or advice or something like the advice goes along the way of use I when you speak or when you write. It's like I think like I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something in it, because then it sort of introduces a bit of humbleness. It's like, if I did this, it's only I did this. And if I don't stick to this, I can overgeneralize it into a kind of general piece of wisdom or truth, which is not backed by anything, because it's only I who did it. And being upfront about it, it's just more honest, and it makes mistakes or omissions or anything kind of more forgivable, and actually makes for a better thing. Like, oh, this is a data point, my data point is either different or similar, and we can work with that.
Yeah, it's a bit about semantics, but basically when you say like people do this or don't do that, that's a very generalized approach. If you say, I notice that my audience tends to do this and doesn't tend to do that, pretty much the same message, but does get way more trust.
Yes. Because that's a good point. Like you intuitively you trust this to be sort of truth more, because it is kind of more contained and it doesn't try to encompass everything under the sun. Good thing. So I also had two meta thoughts or meta questions about this. One we started going into, right? For both, it looks like for both you and me, we were forced a little bit to go through this material, like the guiltiest charge I made us do that. But do you think it is important and valuable to every once in a while expose yourself to things that are kind of novel, different from your usual kind of point of view, and explore them and discuss them on podcast with a friend?
I'd say it does depend on the goals. Like in our case, there is a podcast, and we do try to experiment time to time. And it's nice to take something unorthodox and go through it, even if we dislike it. That's totally fine. I wouldn't say that novelty by itself is the value. Like, I wouldn't just go and try new food just because I have to try new food. Only when I'm curious, or there's someone to share this experience with, or it's just something else which is nice. For instance, in my case, I enjoy our recording way more than I enjoy the text.
Hmm.
It's like one of my Aspen friends mentioned that you could actually read the washing machine manual together and you could still get some fun and pleasure.
They make fun of why they're saying that you shouldn't put cats into your washing machine or something.
It is about the setup. It's not about the practice
Mhm.
of reading some random manuals or researchers or something, because there's too much information around. And if there is no specific goal or value that you get, you will probably just not do it at all. In our case, it's this episode. In Aspen case, it's just getting fresh ideas from other people or looking through some unorthodox, unusual text that you wouldn't read in any other setup. So I do see some value. I'm not sure it should be something really about disagreeing or being overwhelming, because sometimes you don't know. Like, as you were
Right.
picking this article, it could be something we would both say, like, yeah, a great piece of reading. We agree. Let's sign down and recommend and forward it to everyone. So that's just a process of trying something you don't know yet.
But do you think it's important to do that every once in a while? Try something you don't know yet, rather than maybe stick to your kind of current existing echo chamber or something.
I think he actually does have a quote in this book about that, saying that younger people tend to have fluid intelligence, and then older people have crystallized intelligence, and that they're getting a bit more rigid. And sometimes the thinking process itself can also get framed if you don't do these kind of activities, because you're then basically cemented by your previous experience and stuck. And in this regard, people who are in thinking business probably should do some thought experiments time to time, just to keep it, let's say, well, flexible. And people who do the massage or garden or drive things, I think they're fine. Like, they could just explore a new type of movements or seeds or something every once in a while, but basically they can do whatever they enjoy for dozens of years and feel pretty comfortable and relaxed and happy and chill and satisfied and content, being an expert, and then inherit $25 billion from the owner of the mansion that they were gardening.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Like, is it right that you're saying that, like, exposing or doing what we are doing now, kind of discussing material that we sort of disagree a little bit, is a good exercise for sort of intellectual muscle, but then you need sort of to decide for yourself whether you need that muscle or that kind of exercise specifically, right? If it's helpful for the goals or the
Or it's
things you're
just
trying to do.
entertaining, like you just love bitching around and go forward.
Hmm. It's fair. And one other method thought was that I'm not maybe, well, not maybe, I know that for a fact you're more diligent than I am. So I started, like, I had this thing, kind of, initially it was kind of stop and go when I started reading it, and it almost went up to the last day ish to fully explore it, where I fully realized that this is not the thing that I thought it is. This is not the thing that I maybe sold to you when we agreed to discuss this. This is not about the thought leadership, at least in my view of the world. And I realized that in recent times, this was the second time when doing something last minute-ish kind of bit me in the rear end, because when it's last minute, it's like it's too late to change course, right? I didn't feel compelled to write to you. It's like, let's ditch this and let's do something else. So we had to stick through it. And yeah, I'm now thinking how I can be, well, I guess more diligent to avoid putting myself into a situation like this when I put myself in the corner, but not by not doing or not starting something soon enough before the
I think
deadline.
the author has a perfect solution for you in the final words of this website.
Okay,
It says,
let's
I've
do that.
analyzed this concept a lot. I do not recommend this. What I recommend is just publishing good content. Don't overthink it.
That's right. That's right.
I think that we do get the perception that the longer we spend on something, the better it gets, which is not necessarily true. You can spend quite massive periods of time and effort thinking about an idea, which is just useless. And you can get really bright ideas for 15 minutes before the episode as you're skimming through your notes or just looking through the website, and it's still fine. In this episode specifically, I really enjoyed our definitions and our discussion with examples because it did explain things to me. Like, I kind of sorted some people in my environment. I thought I tried to remember a few examples, like where I changed my mind or where somebody impacted the way I think. That's already useful. And it doesn't really matter how much you prepare unless you claim it to be an expert piece of something, because then I do get some higher expectations of you. Like if you tell me this is the way you should do system design checks of engineers, this is where I expect you to prepare. Like that's not something you can draft for 12 minutes before the meeting and present. Like, please do take your time and think. If it's a lifestyle discussion of a guy who texted things with typos and then you blame yourself for not spending 2 hours researching it, I'm fine here.
No, that makes a lot of sense, right? The time spent on something is not, it may have correlation with the quality of work being produced, but not necessarily, right? You can, at some point, you can hit the point of diminishing returns. You spend more time, but it's not improving greatly, or vice versa. You spend time, but the thing is not being improved. That makes a lot of sense. But what do you make out of this idea that, let's say, if I started reading this more thoroughly and more fully earlier, I would have an opportunity to say that, hey, maybe let's switch to something else, which I didn't have because I started sort of too late. So not to kind of fixate on the time spent on the activity, but rather than when in time the activity itself sort of happened.
Let me answer with a story.
Here, all ears.
I think it was around 9, maybe 11 years ago, quite a while ago. I was taking a course by British Council for teachers, and we actually were living in Dnipro, and then we moved to Kiev for a few months to take this course. I co-rented a place with my partner, Alexei, and we were going in 2 parallel groups. Like, we were not studying together, but we were going through the same course, just on different with different instructors. And we had the same tasks to perform. One of these tasks was an essay that we had to write. And boy, how differently we approached this thing. Usually essays was our weekend task, something we had to do in the course of Saturday, for instance, and then another type of paper on Sunday. I would wake up in the morning, have breakfast, sit for 15 minutes taking some notes, and then go for a walk around the lake, come back for lunch, then go shopping, and then come back with some groceries and sit and note down my essay for 2 pages. It took me about 45 minutes. Meanwhile, Alexei, having exactly the same task, would wake up in the morning, have breakfast, stretch, and start writing. Like, he would write, and then by lunch he would have like 6 pages of something drafted, not edited, just like a lot of things. Then he would take a break, maybe a nap, maybe an exercise, and then he would start editing and crystallizing it to the same 2 pages that I did write in those 45 minutes. So when these 2 essays are graded, they're graded the same. Alexei feels unhappy because I seem to be lazy, because like I was just walking around and I got the same results. And I kind of envy him because when he is not writing, he can actually chill. And I have to think on the background during my walks and everything. And it takes all of my mental capacity during the weekend because even while I'm walking around the lake, I'm not enjoying the lake. I'm still thinking on the background about this stuff. And then when the moment comes, we do write the same kind of text. We do get our pros and cons from our approaches. And we both feel jealous about the other person being able to do that. So I'm not sure if this story is the very direct answer to your question, but I think that it's not about the time you spend at the laptop looking into the screen, but all the thoughts that circle around during your walking the dog, taking the tube, sometimes in the middle of the work meeting when you just put this concept and you start thinking about it, that matters. And it's not about how long it took you to shape the notes.
That's right. But what if we throw in a little bit of a complication into the story? What if, well, it's a little bit, I guess, fair because both of you, Alexei and you, would start working on this thing, but in different ways. But what if you decided, oh, like I will, we are going into hypotheticals, like very, very heavy hypotheticals here. So you decide to go like, I don't know, for, in this particular situation, it's difficult, right? Because whatever you decide to do in the background, you can keep thinking about this. But maybe Alexei is there at his computer and started working on this thing, and then he realized, oh, that this topic is it's not interesting enough. But the goal is to write an essay. What if I write a teacher and say like, what if I do essay on a different topic which is more interesting for me, and the teacher says them, yeah, that should go for it, and you, through the sheer fact being away from the computer and not having a possibility to contact a teacher, lose this opportunity to switch to something else, even though in the end you get roughly the same grades.
Let me give you the same hypothetical answer because the chances of this happening are pretty much the same as me meeting the teacher during my walk around the lake, having this friendly conversation and sharing my thoughts about this topic, getting the permission to write about something else.
This is very fair, right? What you are saying is that opportunities are sort of unlimited, right? And then when we cut one opportunity, contacting teacher directly on the computer, it does not, it opens other opportunities as well, like meeting the teacher on the walk. It's just fair.
If
we
I could
should not forget about this.
Sum it up, I would just say that we think differently and you have some kind of expectations on the way you are supposed to think. But I think that your process of thinking may be very different depending on the mode, on the topic, and you have the preferred way of doing stuff. And then there are about 3 other ways that also work, and they do produce quite nice results, but you just don't appreciate them because there is a preferred way that you feel the most comfortable with. A huge piece of paper, a whiteboard, 6 screens, and something else with 6 hours to do the job and no distractions in any noises or something around. Like that's the ideal setup. And then there's life.
Yeah, I guess what matters in the end is the result, right? If you get where you wanted or you got something that's of some value, that's good enough, sort
That's
of.
a very Western approach. You could also say that the way is what matters here, is that you're getting better, is that every thought is new and you actually enjoy the journey.
Yeah, you yes, I guess you can take it both ways and choose the way that's more close to how you think or how you feel about stuff.
I just believe that people who listen to Biweekly at this point, they are definitely not doing this for the results.
No, why not? I think this is at least the second episode in a row where we start with something relatively mundane and then we end up with relatively deeper kind of concepts, all encompassing. That's your thought leadership right there.
Yeah. And then we should end with something trivial like a samurai quote about having no goal and just having the way.
Yes, I should have thought of something like this, but it doesn't. Nothing comes to mind. Nothing as profound.
British Council instructor from that course said, Sometimes you look at people and you see that the lights are on, but nobody's home.
I hope that's not about me, and I hope that's not about listeners, but we can maybe hear from them in the next couple of weeks on our website or on YouTube or in Spotify as well, wherever you can find us.
Or just texting us a direct message saying, what do you actually get from these episodes? Like, is it fun? Is it results? Is it something else? Just curious.
Yep. And how much thought leadership was in this episode.
Or was not in this episode.
Cool. In the meantime, we wish everyone good weeks.
Good weeks.